All right, hey guys, welcome back to the Melanin Margin. I'm your host, Quaviondre Williams,
And I'm Daquon Wilson.
and this is the talk show dedicated to bringing the marginalized to the spotlight and uplift the Black voices that will no longer stay silent. So let's jump straight into this week's race conversation, Black men and emotional expression. Now, Daquon, is fragile masculinity a problem in the Black community?
Just like every episode, yes, it is a problem. But I think fragile masculinity is an especial problem in the Black community just because of some of the things that we go through as Black people. I think a
Mhm.
lot of times Black people are seen as strong or needs to be seen as strong. And therefore we get all of these different stereotypes or kind of perspectives put onto us about who we should be. And anything that goes outside of those kind of realms is seen as being weaker. It's seen as like, being something that is a detriment to our community. So oftentimes I think that like fragile masculinity just comes out as like a byproduct of racism.
Absolutely, I fully agree. It stems all the way back to patriarchy, which is something that affects all races.
Right.
It's a cross cultural thing. It's honestly crazy how in the Black community it's almost even stronger because of the over reliance that we have on trying to remain the strongest one in the room because we have to be. I think
Right.
there's this, I don't know what this quote is, but it's like the idea that, you have to work twice as hard as a Black person. As a Black man, you have to work twice as hard to be half as good.
Right.
And it's the reality that we live in. And I think that a lot of the fragile masculinity that exists within our community stems from that idea that we have to work twice as hard. So we can't just be a man, we have to be twice of a man to be even half of a white man.
Yeah, I think that's very powerful. Like that is something that is kind of taught to you like as a small child. Like growing
Yes.
up, it's one of those things that always happens. And I remember like growing up and like I've never had personal interactions with my parents in terms of like kind of telling me to man up, but have you ever had any of those instances?
Yes, very many times. I mean, can't you tell? For a long time, I've always known that I was of the different persuasion.
Hmm.
And as a kid, it is it becomes almost like a micromanaged kind of thing
Right.
because you are taught as a young Black man, quote unquote, that you have to be always tough. You can't cry. You can't, whatever. You're a sissy if you are. You're a fag if you do this or whatever that. And it's a lot of that kind of internalized hate against femininity that you get from the Black community, even Black women who will perpetuate that image onto you. And my mom, unfortunately, grew up in that era, so she's never called me a sister, nothing like that. But it was always that kind of like, you need to kind of man up. You need to don't cry in front of these people, or don't do this, that, and the fourth. It's always that kind of little nitpicky things. And you don't realize that as you grow up. I was talking about this earlier today with my coworkers, but you don't realize how much you internalize a lot of those ideologies, and realize that for a long time, I was so terrified of expressing my femininity. I was so terrified of expressing my actual voice, because I would always try to bring my voice down and try not to
Hmm.
talk, or like try to talk like I'm echo, like, and it sounds fake when I do it that way. Or I would always put my hands very firmly on my thighs because I speak with my hands. I'm an animated person, and like I said, my voice, for a long time, I used to hate when people would call me ma'am and her and she on the phone for a long time, because it was that internalized hate of my own femininity. Now, as an adult, I'm like, yes, bitch, that's who I am.
Right.
Yes, baby, she, her pronouns all the way. But at growing up, it was shameful, not because I didn't want to be called a reference to those things, but because I didn't want my mom or my dad or my friends to hear someone reference me like that, because it was almost an attack, if that makes any sense. To say that I was feminine or say like that, it would always be like outing me kind of things. But I'm gonna turn it back to you real quick.
Yeah, like I think for me, it's kind of been a really internal journey for me. It was one of those things like I have two older brothers, and like I always noticed that I was the different one. You know, while they did sports and all that stuff, I was like, that's not for me. You know, all of those different types of things. And like you, I would not talk in class because I talk with my hands a lot. And like
Hmm.
if I do begin to talk, I get animated or like especially when I was younger, my voice would get kind of high. So like there was always these instances where I was like, this is different than other men in my classes or
Mm.
whatever. And I found that like oftentimes I was like, oh well, like these things are associated with femininity, but I can't present that way. I can't do this. I can't do this. And even
Yes.
now, like I do makeup, I put nail polish on my nails, like all of these different things, because now I'm a little bit more liberated than before. But back then, I would never do something like that. And it's always been like pondering me, like, why is femininity such a challenge to masculinity?
Yeah, and I think it, like it, just as you brought up before, it comes from white supremacy on the black race, and it comes from patriarchy, which is a centuries, I mean, since the beginning of time type of situation. And I think that, especially in the black community, femininity is seen as weakness.
Mhm.
It's seen as less than. It's seen as not as important as. And it's oftentimes perpetuated by black men. And unfortunately, because women in this particular situation are the oppressed party, they take on those same traits, and they also perpetuate the same uh, belief systems as the male patriarchy. So it's definitely something that I feel has permeated all cultures, and like very specifically the black culture, that femininity is not something that a man can have, because to do so
Right.
makes you soft. It makes you not as worthy of being a man, kind of thing. And I wonder sometimes, you know, when did we have this idea that femininity was weakness? Like where did this idea come from? What do you think?
I think just in general, like you were saying before, it just comes from the patriarchy. It comes from these stereotypical gender roles that's been in place since whenever. You know, women are supposed to be held as like the matrons of the house. They're supposed to do the domestic work, you know, raise kids, all of that stuff. And men are supposed to be strong. They're supposed to be the money makers.
Yes,
In reality, like we all know those gender roles are trash, but
absolutely.
oftentimes these gender roles are enforced and reinforced in Black communities because of how often Black families are seen as being dysfunctional. So I think
Mm.
part of this within the Black community is this overcorrection in order to be able to seen as a functional family, where you have the masculine male figure, where you have the feminine housewife, where you have the kids that fit whatever gender roles that they are you know, opposed to, or not opposed to, but like whatever gender roles that they are seen as, perceived as. And that's why I think it is, but I'll let you sound off.
I wanted to touch back on what you said about the dysfunction. I think that was a really great point you brought up. Do you think that the hyper masculinity or the hyper femininity that we see in our community is sort of a self defense mechanism?
I think so. I think it's a self-defense mechanism because of how often perceptions and stereotypes of Black people kind of twist what gender people are perceived as. For
Mm,
example, you have a lot of depictions of Black men as being lazy, they can't work, kind of the
mm,
castration of the Black male, essentially. Especially in like early, you know, post slavery, Jim Crow era type media, kind of showing how Black men are just like not real men. But similarly, you have that for women as well, kind of portraying this mammy type figure where, you know,
mm-hmm.
they're not like this feminine person, they're kind of tough and asexual looking. So these things, I think, have a lot to do with our racist history in this country and these perceptions and an overperformance of gender norms in order to be seen within the gender norms.
Yeah, I fully agree. It definitely comes across as a defense to try to, like you said before, it's almost like I said before, micromanaging.
Right.
It's I have to be seen a certain way so that people don't see me as this. I have to be the strong black man, because if I'm not the strong black man, then I'm nothing, you know? And
Right.
it's almost this kind of um way that we've kind of ingrained masculinity so deeply into the male species, specifically black men, that this ingrained idea that if you are not if you are anything less than a man, if you do anything that's feminine, anything that is outside of your gender norm or whatever that is, then you are not a man. And
Right.
if you're not a man, then you have nothing to contribute. At least that's how our society teaches us, which is also very problematic and sexist because of the fact that it's basically denoting that femininity is less than or equal to nothing.
Exactly.
And I find it quite perplexing because I've had plenty of people have this kind of, even when it comes to the gay community too, where it's like gay, and we'll get to this on another episode, but how gay men who are more feminine in nature are oftentimes emasculated because of their femininity, or because they choose to express their femininity in such a way. And not all gay men go by she, her pronouns. Not every gay man wants to be called her, she, whatever girl. Like not many of them do that, even if they have that femininity expressed in them. But why do you think that there's this kind of, it's like we have to put you in this box. You can't be both. You can't be both masculine and feminine. You can't be both. You can't have a gender of male and go by she or her pronouns, or go by he him pronouns, but your gender is female. Like, why do you think there's just such a massive force, or this massive idea that we have to put people in this categorical box, that we have to put them in certain stereotypes?
I think it's because a lot of times our society just wants to see things in the binary. Our society
Mm.
just is chained to that binary of either this or this, nothing else in between. When in reality, like everything is a spectrum. There's
Yes.
so many different expressions, identities, etc. But a lot of times our society is just, we need to categorize something so we know what it is. We're
Mm.
familiar with it. It's something that is known among us for years. But a lot of times, like these sorts of gender expressions or identities, like people say that like this is this new thing, like men painting their nails is this new thing, men wearing feminine clothing is this new thing. But in reality, gender norms evolve and change over time. There was a time when high heels were worn by men to denote nobility. There was a time when men painted their nails for certain reasons. So it's one of those things that people are bound to the binary as a way of trying to force people into a category that they are comfortable with and that they recognize.
Absolutely. I fully agree. It's the fear of the different, the fear
Right.
of the something that stands out, the uniqueness. And to be unique or to not fit into these roles is to be a direct challenge to the diaspora. It's a direct challenge to the culture. It's a direct challenge against masculinity. And moving the conversation backwards, back to the topic a little bit more. I wanted to ask you, because I have my own personal experiences with this, but I wanted to know about yours. Have you had issues of showing your emotions or showing your affection towards your father or
Interesting.
male members of your family?
Thinking back, like it's one of those topics that I don't think it was towards my family in general. I think that I just had trouble expressing emotions to anyone,
Mm.
regardless of whether they were family or not. I think that, kind of like I was saying before, like growing up within these rigid gender roles and societal pressures of performing in a certain way, and knowing that I didn't fit that way, it was something that was very triggering for me in order anytime I was in a social situation. So a lot of times growing up, like, I didn't express emotion to just about anyone because I didn't want people coming close to me. I didn't want people coming in and seeing like the things that I tried to hide. I didn't feel like
Mm.
putting up this performance anymore. There were plenty of times when I would just get tired of trying to be something that I'm not, that I just like recluse myself into my room and just like not talk to anybody. And like even my parents would notice, like I had a phase where like I would go to school, come home, go in my room, not talk to anybody, just kind of be by myself, because it was in solitude that I was able to like be myself, and the only person there to judge me was me. So yeah, definitely had a lot of just like troubles expressing my emotions. And I think that, you know, coming to college and being in a new environment allowed me to think about who I am and express myself a little bit more. And that's when I noticed that I was more in tune with my emotions. I was able to be vulnerable. I was able to share things with people that I would never have shared before. So I think that a lot of this kind of performance and gender roles play into how we are vulnerable with each other, both on a familiar level or friends.
I got you. You brought up some really amazing points there, Daquon. And I just want to jump back on that love language that part that you brought in, is that you felt the need to perform and the need to fit into a certain image so that people would not see the truth. And
Right.
I fully relate to that, and I still struggle with that even to this day, because for me, growing up, my love language is physical touch. Like I need to be touched to feel affection. It's not as easy as just saying it. That's just personally for me. And growing up, my family was vehemently against it. I mean, because I was the only one in
Hmm.
my family who was a hugger, like the only one. And there's this memory that I have that when I was younger, I went to my dad's house. Our mom and dad are we're not together, and my aunt was, you know, a nice lady, sweet lady, whatever. But um, I was trying to, I don't know what led to it, but I was about to go to bed, and usually when I go to bed, I hug whoever's in the house, whatever the case may be, because that's what I did. You know, my mom didn't like it either, but she dealt with it. She tolerated it for what it was, just the one hug. And I went to my aunt's the living room, my aunt, and I tried to hug her, and I was like, "Please give me a hug. I just want to hug or whatever." And she pushed me really hard to the point I kind of almost fell.
Wow.
And it was like denying my version of love and it was the violent reaction that really scared me. It was just like you are so opposed to me showing any kind of vulnerability that just it made me feel unloved and unworthy, you know. And it didn't stop there, you know. And of course, she apologized after the fact or whatever, you know. But it didn't. The trauma was already there. Now they can't really take back what happened. And my dad and my mom, my sister, you know, they are not huggers. That's just not who they are. And at 22 years old, I've had to shift a lot of who I was as a kid. And I don't mean to go on, but I just want to really kind of let you in a little bit with this part. But there was, as a kid, I was always a hugger. I was always a hugger. And I remember one time I used to hug teachers too, as a kid. And I remember distinctly that my one of my teachers had reported me to the principal because she thought that I was trying to do something to her, I guess.
Wow.
And yeah, and I mean, we don't even get to the fact that I was a black man and she was accusing of. So we're not gonna get into that.
That's
But
a conversation for another
that's a whole
day.
other conversation there, that we just can't let Black children be Black children, but that's another conversation for another day. Or maybe season 3 or season 4. But anyway, so, but I felt for a long time I've had to, I was the opposite of you, where you were closed in and have now felt the freedom of now being able to express who you are. I've had to do the opposite. You know, I am an out gay person or an out pansexual person, but my affections have had to be pulled back because I've noticed that the severe negative reactions that I get from expressing the love how I want to express it is just astronomical, and I've had to sacrifice my own heart and my own love, or how I receive love, in order to make everybody else okay.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I think that that is something so powerful. And I really appreciate where you went with that story because it's something that we don't think about all the time. We don't think about like the sacrifices that people make just to fit into some gender role, just to fit into some perceived way of showing love or showing expression, or what is appropriate times to show love and appropriate times to show emotional expression. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of times we don't talk about. We don't
Mm,
talk about how everybody has their own different love language. We just assume this is how you show love and this is how you should show love, and we don't accept anything other than that. But really need to do a lot of unlearning when it comes to what love is and what love feels like and how we give and also receive love. And that's something that I had to learn a lot in terms of how do I receive love, because I've been that person where like I just don't touch me, don't talk, don't give me
yeah.
nothing, like all of those types of things. But it took a lot to be able to kind of, change my brain in a way to be like, this is how this person is showing their love for me. This is how they are showing that they care for me. So there's been a lot of situations where like, somebody will go in for a hug and I'm like, I'm not a hugger. But
Yeah.
I have to think like, they are trying to like create this space where they can show love to somebody else. They are in a vulnerable state right now. And I think a lot of times we can be so selfish when it comes to our emotions, that our own emotions are the only thing that matters. And like, just kind of tying it back to this entire topic, I think that's one of the reasons why masculinity can be so fragile, is that we are always trying to protect ourselves. We are always trying to create this image, and we don't want anybody else to change that image. But we are a world of so many different people, of so many different types of expressions, that there are times when our expression may not be the one somebody else is doing, but sometimes we accept that. But I don't think it should ever be a situation where you feel like you can't ever express love in the way you feel comfortable expressing.
And and I fully understand where you're coming from. And it's just it's gotten to the point now where, now I've had to lie. Just be like, oh, I hate to be in touch. Like, don't ever touch me, like whatever. I've had to put on a front because I had to stop myself, because reality was, like I said before, my mom, my sister, I fought with my mom for so many years about this. My mom hates being like hugged, and it's just not her thing. And like we got into so many arguments about it, and so many just all kinds of stuff about that, because I'm like, this is the only way that I know how for you to show me. My mom's like, well, I feed you and I do this and I do that and I'm here for you and blah blah. I'm like, but it's not the same. It's not the same. It's what I need from it. And it's kind of hard, because the reality is you want to respect people's boundaries as well. You want to respect people's boundaries, you want to ask for consent. And that's the main thing there, is that you don't hug everybody.
Right.
You ask for that permission. But it's like, when you can't when it's always that when the way that you show your affection is always denied by the people closest to you and by the people in your life. I mean, my big brother, well, my best friend, I call him big brother, Tim, he's from the Asia community, and they are not huggers. They're not like, that's just not their thing. And we've known each other for almost 3 years now. I've never hugged him before. I know my mom, my sister are not those kinds of people. So it's just, I've had to pull away in protecting myself in order to keep others okay, in order to keep others from being uncomfortable. But it's kind of like, if you have no one to show your expression to, it creates this almost, it's like, y'all are okay with how things are, but I'm not. And I'm still struggling with understanding whether or not you care about me or whether or not you love me, even though I know you do here. But in here, it's not the same. But, moving on from that point, I just want to know, do you think that the emotional expression in Black men has an effect on their maturity level? Like, do you think that that's a reason why a lot of Black men are kind of emotionally stunted in some ways?
I think it does. I think it definitely does, because for a long time, Black men are not afforded the space to think about emotional maturity, to show emotion, to like understand how they show emotion, understand how others show emotion. They're not given that space. They're told, you are a Black man, like you just need to go do this, do that, whatever. So I think that like it is one of the reasons why, is that an excuse? Definitely not. Everybody, regardless of who you are, has some type of unlearning to do, but it is something that is learned that needs to be unlearned.
Absolutely, I fully agree. I think that it is an explanation, but it is not an excuse. And then we talked about this before. This explains your actions. It does not excuse your actions. And I do think
Right.
that there is this inherent patriarchy that has a massive effect and influence in our everyday lives. I mean, just thinking about how we raise our children, how we put girls in pink and boys in blue. We give boys basketballs and footballs and soccer balls, and we give them action figures and cars and blah 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 blah. But women are given dolls and babies and cooking sets and things that teach them how to be parents. I mean, most girls are already creating romantic relationships when they're in their doll houses type things or whatever. They're already understanding these. They're at such a young age, they're given an education that is not afforded to men in the same regard.
Right.
There are so many. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I agree. I think that this entire thing of like girls need to play with dolls just shows that like from a very young age, girls are told you need to have empathy. You need to be able to show that you have empathy and compassion, because you need compassion to raise a baby. You need
Mm-hmm.
compassion and empathy to have a successful relationship. But when we tell boys go play with an action figure, it's like go do something. When it's go play with the cards, go do something, not feel anything.
Absolutely. There was this one when I was at the Governor's Honors Program in Augusta for theater. There was this. We were on a campus, and on the school campus, we were like in high school or whatever. And we lived on campus, washed clothes, stuff like that, or whatever the case may be. But I remember I was going downstairs to wash my clothes, and a guy had walked up to me. He was looking at me, and I was like, what did you? I was washing my clothes, but I was like, why is he watching me? Like, what is going on? And he had his like basket and his stuff on his side, and he walked up to me, and he was like, hey, how do you wash clothes? And like, and this isn't to make fun of this guy. It's just like, just honestly, like the reality of, wow. And I think in this, I was 16 at the time. And it's like, you don't know how to wash clothes? And it really taught me, like, because my mom was really big on making sure that her children were very, educated on certain things. Like, just because I'm a man does not mean that, in that regard, my mom was not that way. Me and my sister both learned how to cook. Me and my sister both learned how to wash clothes. Me and my sister both learned how to clean a house, clean our rooms. I was not given agency to be dirty as a boy. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I was not given agency to be that. And I think that that was a really good part of my mom's side, because while she did have some internalized patriarchal ideals, in that regard, she was like, no, just because you a dude don't mean shit. And she made sure that I cleaned the house, cleaned my room, made sure my body was very clean, make sure my stuff was good, make sure I brushed my teeth every morning, like stuff like that. These are things that my mom taught me. So when I went to this program without my mom, I was like, well, I already know how to basically be self-sufficient, because that's what mom taught me. Because she never was about just doing things for us. She wanted us to learn. But that guy, he didn't have that same luxury of being able to be self-sufficient as a man, because his mom was likely taking care of him. How do you feel about stuff like that? Like, have you run into a situation like that?
Oh, I run into that all the time. Like, literally when you go to Emory, they'll send you some letter that's like, oh, here's like the university laundry service where you pay for people to do your laundry for you. Yeah, and it's like hundreds of dollars a year or semester. Like, it's a lot of money, but there have been literally times when I've known somebody that paid somebody to do their laundry because he didn't know how to do it. Just like certain skills, even just like cooking, things like that. Like, there are people who don't know how to cook their own meals. They don't know how to use an oven, how to use a stove, anything like that. Like, and it's one of those things, like going back to the whole toys thing, that's how we're socialized. That's how we're told, hey, this is what a man is supposed to do. This is what a woman is supposed to do. And they grow up and then they get into the real world and they don't have somebody to do it for them. And that's when they realize, oh, I have to learn how to do things myself. So I think that's one of the problems with kind of gendering basic human sustainability task. Like, cooking should not be gendered.
Yeah.
Clothing, all these Barbie dolls should not be gendered. Like, all of these different things, it should not be gendered, because that's only reinforcing.
Absolutely. I fully agree. I think it's so problematic to assume that your child is a boy, or to just assume that your child is a girl. I think that assumption is arrogant, because you don't know what your child would be into. You don't know what your child would enjoy. And I remember a long time ago when I was telling my mom I was doing my makeup in the mirror one day for a theater performance. And I was like, Mom, this is really great. This is really fun. Like, I'm really good at this. Like, I would like to probably wear this to school. Like, can I do this? Like, my mom was like, no. Men don't wear makeup. That's not what you can do. Whatever. And I was like, but I like it. Or at the time, I liked it. I wanted to learn more about it. And I wanted to get more experience with it. And I was like, Mom, this is really, whatever. My mom was like, no. And I think that was her way of trying to protect me. But it's just crazy that we have to protect our children from just experiencing things that they want to do. Like, I mean, it's just, like I said, now I don't have any experience with makeup at all. Like, I just never got back into it. But like, it was just like, what if she let me?
Right.
Like, you just kind of think about, like, what if I was given that agency to be free? But we put these stringent roles on children at such a young age. It's always, you're going to get, even when and that's just, even sexuality is stringent. It's just like, well, you got to get you a girlfriend, or do you have a girlfriend? You got a girlfriend, or you got a whatever? Or are you playing sports? What sports you into? Or show me your baby doll. What's your new baby doll name? Like, stuff like that. You don't even, I remember this very clear memory of me standing and talking to my dad's friend, and him was telling me, hey, don't put your hand on your hip. And I was like, motherfucker. Like, and my dad was like, hold up, motherfucker. Because my dad wasn't about that. But like, that was one of the good things about it. But it was just crazy to me that I'm like, I can't even stand. I'm standing. I'm literally standing. Huh?
Can't even stand.
I can't even stand what y'all are telling me how I should be standing, how I should be speaking, how I should be playing, what I should be interested in, what I should not be interested in. You know, these are things that we don't even realize that we're like, and the crazy part is, if your child is into makeup and you tell them no, that's not gonna stop them.
Not at all.
Like, just because you tell your son that you call your son, oh, you can't wear wigs, don't mean that when the fuck they get out that house, they're not gonna put a wig on. Like, you know what I'm saying? But we give this, but sometimes for some of us, it really does affect us. And we don't ever get back into it again because we're like, that's not what I'm supposed to do.
Right. Like, I know for me, there's been certain times when I've like had to push myself outside of my comfort zone just to be able to like do something to make me happy. Like, there's been plenty of times when like I've gone home with makeup on or like nails, and like I would get like a look or something from somebody. Like, it's South Carolina, people will judge you for
Yeah.
anything that they don't like. And like that's like still affects me to this day. Like, it still affects me. Like, if I want to go to the store and buy makeup, I'm just filled with anxiety because I'm like,
Yes.
okay, who's watching, who's judging me, like what's going to happen? Like, and even now, like, you know, I can put on I don't have makeup on right now, but like I can put on makeup and be happy and present as how I want to, but there are still some barriers, there are still some hesitations that I have, even though I'm more comfortable in my expression now than before.
I fully agree. There's still things that I can't do now because of the neighborhood I live in and the job that I do and stuff like that. Like, there's still some things like, you know, there's so many stylistic choices that I would like to make that because of where I live or because of who I where, you know, and that's why I give kudos to people who can, you know, the confidence it takes to be able to do that. Because like I said before, a lot of that confidence sometimes can fade. A lot of that confidence can be really hard to maintain.
Mm.
And even you with your makeup is right. It's right. Okay. It's beats. And even without the makeup, it still beats. But you know, it's crazy to me that we have this, why people can't mind their business. Like, why, what is me wearing makeup affecting you? How is me having my nails done affecting you? How is me
It
wearing
costs
a dress?
$0.00 to mind your business.
Like nothing. And I can't, for me, I can't even dress. Like, I am so terrified to approach my boss about using the correct pronouns, or my coworkers about using the correct pronouns, because you know, I'm still on probation right now at the job until like for a year, and non-binary people are not a protected class in the discrimination thing. So like, I could fully be fired just because of that. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, I don't know if that's exactly how they would react, but there is this fear, like this fear in me that like, if I bring it up, will they like let me go because of it? Would that be just too much for someone to get? You know what I mean?
Right. And I think that's how we kind of see this intersection between like how toxic masculinity just plays into gender expression and sexuality and all of these different things. Like, even in like thinking about, you know, DL culture, DL men, like it's one of those things where like the amount of times I've had somebody say, oh, you wear makeup, like I'm not with that, like I want to date a man because I'm dating a man, not a woman. And it's
Oh, that's another
child,
episode, Daquon. That's another episode, Daquon.
that's another episode. But like, it's
I
one
feel
of
you
those
though.
things that masculinity can weave into every single aspect of our lives. I
Yes.
think that's when we kind of see this difference between like fragile masculinity and toxic masculinity. I
Yes.
think it's, at least in my eyes, I see fragile masculinity being something that's often just like self-centered, like trying to
Yes.
protect yourself, while toxic masculinity is something you put onto other people when you attack other people. You know, fragile masculinity can be more defensive, while toxic masculinity be more offensive. But have you ever noticed any difference between fragile masculinity and toxic masculinity?
Absolutely. Fragile masculinity is being afraid of being in the same room with a gay man. Toxic masculinity is telling that gay man that he's a woman.
Mm.
You know, it's a subtle difference, but it's still a difference, and both are wrong.
Right.
But it's just the idea of like a toxic masculinity is more dangerous because it perpetuates fragile masculinity. It's what enforces fragile masculinity.
Right.
You know, so they work hand in hand in this constant pursuit to keep patriarchy in the top. And it's crazy because there are so many times where, you know, you do find a level of confidence, or like let's talk about barbershops.
Ooh.
You know what? Let's bring it up, Daquon. See, we're talking about toxic masculinity. Let's bring up black barbershops.
Right.
That right there, I cannot tell you, honestly and truly, I have not been to a barbershop at all in months. Because I hate having to hide who I am for fear of how these black men in this room will react because of how just graphic it can sometimes get in those conversations. And, you know, I just always try to let people know, like, you never know who's listening. You never know who's listening. And it's really prevalent in barbershops especially. And I'm always extremely terrified of going into a barbershop and being found out of being gay, or like saying the wrong thing or making the wrong comment and someone looks at me the wrong way, because like it's just the culture in a black barbershop is very masculine. Do you feel the same way about that, Daquan?
Ooh, like you talking about barbershop just brings back so many memories in my mind. Like I haven't been to a barbershop in years. Like I rarely go to barbershops. Back when I did go, I had to go maybe like once a year. I try to avoid barbershops all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like just being frankly honest, one of the reasons why I started to grow my hair out was because I didn't want to go to barbershops. I didn't want to go and get my hair cut and like try to keep a low fade or whatever like that. Because of just this toxic masculinity in barbershops. I remember one specific time, I think maybe it was high school or like right before college. I remember going to a barbershop and there was this man, you know, somebody was asking me a question and I was talking about how I was going to Emory or something like that in Atlanta. And this man said something about, oh, you have to be careful in Atlanta. That's where all the gay people are. And, you know, gay people, they just bring A's, they'll do all that stuff, you know. And they were talking about how, like, they're okay with people, but, you know, I can't deal with that gay stuff. I can't deal, like, they're just too much and all of that things. And that entire time, I was just fuming on the inside. I was
Yes.
burning up in that chair, just like wanting to say something, but at the same time, like I was at that barbershop by myself. I could not defend myself if something happened, if something came out and like I said I was gay or something like that. And it was one of the reasons why I just avoided barbershops for a long time, because I've always seen them within that light. I've always seen them in that hyper masculine light. And I completely agree with you in terms of like, you never know who's in that room when you're saying all of these different things and what you're doing when you're saying these different things. And that's why toxic masculinity is such a problem, is you're always projecting yourself onto somebody. You're always projecting what you think a man should be onto somebody. And that just doesn't affect them for that moment. That affects them and that can last for their entire life.
It actually, and I fully agree with what you're saying, and I know what that feeling is like. That feeling is like what you're describing, of like hearing someone say, or hearing them say some sexist remarks, or hearing them, and you're just like, you want to defend, and you do, and if you do speak up, the conversation turns elsewhere. You're there trying to figure out why you're defending so heavily. Or then when you, like you said, when you speak up about, when you hear them reference gay people, like I cringe every single time. Where, well, like, because usually they'll have like Maury Povich on, or like something in the background usually,
Mhm.
and I would be so afraid when I see a gay man on the screen, because I was like, please don't let them say anything. Please, God, don't let them say anything about that gay man on the screen. And it's not because I'm ashamed of that gay man, but I'm just so terrified of them going off about gay people right in front of me, because that's honestly what we see almost in every black-owned barbershop. And I don't know if it's the same in white barbershops. Comment down below if it's the same there for you, if you're a gay person who's experienced that before. Is it the same in white barbershops? Because in black barbershops, it is just completely homophobic in so many ways. And it's just, I've gotten to the point now where, like I said, my mom cuts my hair now. Right. I shave my own beard off. Huh?
My brother cuts my hair.
Yeah, and it's like, because it's the only place where I can feel safe and vulnerable in, you know what I mean? And I feel like people don't understand that, you never know who's in the room. You never know whose life you're affecting. You never know whose minds you're shaping, because the reality is those homophobic belief systems that you are consistently perpetuating in this environment is shaping the minds of the children that come in to get their hair cut. Some barbers have been the barbers of that child since they were babies, since they were like kids. So when you're consistently hearing this barrage, usually about every 2 weeks when people get their hair cut, so you're hearing this almost half of the every other week you're hearing this stuff, so it ingrains inside of you, and you may end up taking in that fragile masculinity, and eventually you may start to express it as toxic masculinity. It's the cycle of you're talking about it, then you're talking about it. And I always wondered, like, I went to a barbershop, like I said before, this is why I stopped going, because I was like, well, it's 2020. It's 2020. At the time, it was 2020. I'm like, we gotta have come farther. Like, we've got to have come farther than this. And to go back into a barbershop and to hear the same dialogue. Because you know why? The kids that were getting their haircut back in the day, the kids that were my age getting their haircut, hearing that same stuff, are perpetuating the same images as they are barbers now.
Right. That generational trauma goes along. And again, that's an episode.
Another episode. But I wanted to get on you about that idea of like the platonic relationships within the Black community, because there is definitely a distinct difference, and I think this in other cultures too. Well, not really, actually. I'm gonna comment on that one in just a second. Let me get my little note right here for that. But I wanted to say that in the Black community, Black men are so freaking terrified of showing their other Black brother expression that it's just a physical expression, like a hug or like anything like that, it's a no. It's a absolutely the fuck not. Right. And I remember as a kid, I would watch the TV and like, you get a kiss on the cheek from your mom and your dad, and I sit on the movies like, oh, I want to try that one time. And I had kissed my dad on the cheek, and my dad got really aggressive and angry at me. It was like, you don't ever fucking kiss a man and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, shit. You know what I mean? Like, as a little kid, right. I'm like, I just wanted to kiss my father. Like, I just wanted to kiss my dad. And like, it was just like, this is not what you should be doing. You should never do something like this. Like, what do you think about that, Daquon?
I think it's so common. It happens so much. It's one of those things that I remember, growing up, like anytime I had a Black male friend that showed just a slightest bit of femininity, one of my parents would always ask, my mom would always ask, like, oh, is he, gay? Like, whatever, like that would happen with one of my friends, like even meeting you, like, she asked me that. And I was like, why is this so important? Like, why is this something that Black men just can't be friends with each other? Yeah. That one of them always have to be gay, or like if any type of femininity or emotion or expression happens within a relationship, it diminishes their relationship or something like that. But I think kind of going back, like it's one of those things that I've noticed so often that, a group of Black male friends don't necessarily hug each other, or, it's always, dap them up. That's it. Like, yeah. Minimum contact.
And I wanted to touch base on it. That's why sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and I was just saying, I don't understand why it can't be something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to touch back on that a little bit too. About if it's so crazy because in Korea or like in Asian friendships, in certain like I said, and specifically in Korea, that's not a thing. Like Korean men will hug each other. Sometimes they'll watch each other's back. Sometimes some of the community things are like, you know, they'll hold each other's hands. Like they'll do all that. And it's not, there's no like suspicion that they're having sex. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's no suspicion about their sexuality. Their sexuality doesn't come into question unless they're like, you know, making out with the guy or something like that. But it's like, you know, even then it's like, it's expression and it's crazy for a culture that is not very like physically expressive in that way. With their friend groups, it's not even a thing. Like if you like men in Korea will arm in arm, hold hands, hug, like, you know, like it's not a, they'll like, I've seen this one you know, video of like the Korean guy who like, you know, covered up his friend. Like they were like sleeping together, but he was covering them up or whatever because he was cold or whatever. And I was like, that's so sweet. But like, yeah, it was so sweet. But I was like, but why is it that if you do that to a man, or if you sleep in the same like room with a man, or you sleep with you're trying to show your friend expression or your friend any kind of affection, it's automatically y'all fucking, like
something going on between there.
Or like if we are two gay men together as friends, everybody's like, they gotta be dating. They gotta be dating. That's the only thing. That's kind of like, we could just be friends.
Right.
We could fully just be friends, but it's like the moment that there is an expression, and like, once again, have you ever had that conversation? People were like, for me, I've had people go like, ooh, I think you will like him because he gay. And I'm like, does he have a personality? What's his name? Well, I mean, can I get a name? Can I get a name?
Star sign.
Anything. Something. They're like, oh, if that person's gay, you're gay, that'll work. And the reason I think that where that comes from is that same image that men showing femininity or showing expression or showing, which I don't understand how affection is femininity, but anyway. But the reality is like, because of that idea, because of the idea that femininity is a show of affection, and it's showing affection and showing that if you are a feminine man or a feminine gay man, then any gay person is your type, right? That's because that's how people see it, because it is, you can't be feminine and not be interested in blank, blank, and blank. You can't be affectionate to your male friends in the Black community without trying to be sus or down low or trying to cap a feel or trying to do something like that. And I just think it's so crazy because it's not even shown that way in feminine. Women will fully undress in front of each other. Right. And like check each other's breasts and shit. Like I've been in the fucking women's dressing rooms before. And they're like, girl, can you keep it under my titty real quick? And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, oh no, not feeling under my titty. But it was crazy because I was like, to them it's not a problem. Like they will sleep with each other, they will hug each other, not in a non-sexual way. Like they'll sleep with each other, they'll hug each other, they'll hold each other, like they'll just be friends. And it's kind of like, why is that a problem with us? Why?
Right, like women can do all that, and like if you're a man, you can't even be in the same urinal next to somebody. You gotta go on to the opposite sides of the urinals or something like that. Like something so stupid that like men cannot be in proximity with other men without it being sus, which the whole concept of being sus just needs to be obliterated.
Honestly, it's like, I don't understand. I understand where it comes from. I don't understand why it's still a thing. Like after all this evolving that we're doing, and with all this growing that we're doing, that men can't show, like I said before, that's such a visceral reaction from my father. And I'm like, you're my father. Right. If there's any man on this earth that I should be able to be fully affectionate with, it should be my father. If I want to hug you, if I want to kiss you on the cheek, whatever the case may be, that shouldn't be a problem. But I noticed that my sister could. Mm. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or like my dad, not my biological father was the one who was that guy, but my dad, my stepfather, the one who raised me, he was I always felt like there was a favoritism sometimes. And it wasn't that, but it was just like, it felt like favoritism because my sister was given more agency to be feminine and to be herself and to be emotionally vulnerable. and to feel my father's love and the hugging and the whatever the case may be. Whereas I was kind of like, it was always like, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do this, you got to do that. It's very structured. Like, as long as I got my chores done, I was good. But the hugging shit was not an option. The any kind of affection, any kind of a good job, the reinforcements was not a thing, because as a Black man, you have to be taught not to expect validation from anyone. But if you should be getting validation from anyone in your life, it should be your parents.
Right.
It should be your parents.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
I was just going to jump in and say, I think that it's one of those things that I think about everything that can happen. And I think that, you know, going back to this idea that fragile masculinity is a defense, some of this emotional unavailability is a defense mechanism. It's one of those things that, like, if you just think about the world right now, like, as a Black man, you are immediately seen as a threat and you can die at any moment because of, as a Black person, honestly, as a Black person, you can die at any moment. And, you know, this emotional unavailability comes from a place of like, you know, something could happen to me. And if you're close to me, you're going to feel a lot of things. So I'm going to step back and, you know, kind of create this barrier so it doesn't hit you as hard. But like, as you said before, it may be an explanation, but it's sure not an excuse.
Absolutely not. And it's so baffling to me, because it's kind of like, these are, and that's why men are so emotionally unavailable. That's why so many men are so unable to express how they really feel, because they're torn down by the world and telling them that that's not okay. Like, like I said before about the whole thing about my hugging thing, it's kind of like, people have tried to hug me now and I'm like, don't touch me. Like, don't put your hands on me, because I feel like that's a form of weakness now. That if I allow myself to be vulnerable, you will hurt me. Because every time I have allowed myself to hug or to be vulnerable in that way, because that is my love language, so it's my vulnerability. And when I'm pushed back on it, it becomes painful to feel affection in the way that you interpret it, because you're like, how are you going to hurt me next, kind of thing. Like, when my mom hugs me now, after the years of fighting to kind of get her whatever, I'm very resistant, because I'm like, this won't last. You won't get it won't be enough. Does that make sense? You know, like with my sister, she hugs him like, okay, you know, or all right, you know, and I'm kind of like, I don't want to be touched anymore, because I'm like, every time I have allowed someone to see my love language and to understand the way I show affection, it's always been received negatively. I have not been given agency to be able to show myself in my truest form, in the fact that I need to be touched, to feel connected. And yet now, because of how much society has shown me the toxic masculinity that has been perpetuated onto me, the visceral reactions of all of this is how a man should act, this is how a man should be, I have had to harden myself to protect myself.
Right.
I've had to harden my heart and harden things that I know and I know it's not healthy. I know it's not healthy. I know it's not something, I know it's not maybe all the way stable, but it's the only way that I can survive. Because if I allow myself to be vulnerable and I allow myself agency to be how I really want to be, the reaction is always detrimental and it makes me feel worse still.
Yeah, that's very real. It's one of those things that unless you are in a space where you feel comfortable to be vulnerable, unless you are in a place in life where the people around you make you comfortable enough to feel vulnerable, you can't be vulnerable.
And that's where I keep trying to get people to fucking get. Like, I wish people would just understand that, like, especially Black parents, like, I get it, you know, and we'll get to this. We will get to this, but I'm gonna touch on it just lightly. I'm gonna touch on just a little bit lightly today. It's a little tiptoe, but it's this idea that you have to harden your Black children, specifically your Black men. And then you get upset when said Black men are hardened. Does that make sense?
It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
And that's the point. It's like you like, especially with women, like it's always like, I want a man who's sensitive. I want a man who is going to give me flowers and give me this and the fourth. But whenever you see a sensitive man or a sensitive man approaches you, sometimes you're like, like, right. You have a visceral like, oh, I need a man who can throw me in and throw me into a wall and like, you know, tell me what I'm going to do and what I'm not going to do. It's kind of like, that's not, you can't, what the fuck?
1 + 1 = 2.
What the fuck is this? So like, and that's what I'm saying. Like, you cannot expect Black men to be sensitive and to be understanding if you are also like, you can't be like, I want a man to give me flowers, but when you see your Black son picking flowers, that's gay. Like, you know what I mean? You can't be like, I want my man to hear my feelings and understand my feelings, and then when your little boy is crying, man up. Like, what? You're creating the very man that you are creating the man that is the antithesis of what you truly want.
Right. Because how can we understand emotions if we are never afforded the opportunity to express them? We can't understand something that is not a part of our lives.
Say it again, Daquon. # what?
How can we understand emotions if we're not afforded the availability, the space, the opportunity to express emotions?
And that's where it is. That is the problem. Is that if you want Black men, and once again, it's an explanation, not an excuse to perpetuate harm. But the reality is, you can't tell a man to be sensitive, but in the same vein, tell him to be a man. Like, have you ever had this? I'm gonna get on this real quick too. Have you ever seen like the movies where the women are like, oh, I want a man who's gonna be, you know, this and that and the fourth. I want him to be rough and want him to be scruffy and want him to be like, he don't take no shit and he don't do this and that and the fourth, or whatever. And then those same women get upset when that man is never talking about how he feels about them, never expressing his emotion to them. And it's kind of like, well, you asked for a man who was about his money, about his job, about this and that and the fourth. It's only gonna give you what the bare essentials, whatever. And you complain about him not being romantic.
Right. You want him to be romantic, but the moment he opens up and be like, you know, I've been going through a real hard time, whatever. Oh, now you're soft. And that is the first thing I see in arguments, like a man crying, the image of a Black man crying will be met with such visceral reactions from the Black community. There was this one video I saw online where this Black man was at his wedding and his best man was crying and he hugged him, and it was just like a very, like, you know, it was a very emotionally mature moment I saw. Like, they both were crying and they were hugging each other because it was like, he was so happy for his friend. I was like, get the fuck. I was like, not the tears, wait a minute. Like, but it was so beautiful. In the comments, like, what the fuck are they doing? Or they must be doing something behind the doors. They must be doing something, whatever. He must be. I'm like, where? What the fuck? Like, why can't we just let people be happy? Like, honestly, and it was crazy because the moment was so beautiful, but it was so, the reaction to it. Or like, there was this one bit, even with like Black men kissing their Black sons, like, don't be kissing on him because he'll get soft, he'll get whatever, he'll get this and forth. I'm like, showing your child affection is soft now. Showing your child giving your child validation is something that should be taken away from them. As Black people, and this is a PSA, we gonna end the discussion on this one right here. If you got anything else to add, Daquon, about this one, I'll just say, let people live. Let people live. Let people be happy. As a community, we go through so much every single day, every single hour, every single minute, every single second. There is so much in this world to tear us down. So the bare minimum that we can do if we want to fight for liberation and all that stuff is to show care to our community, is to show love and affection and just like build each other up.
I fully agree. And that's why I want to say this. And I want to say that the reality is, in this world, Black men and women are going to have the hate and the pain of being Black women and being Black men as a burden on their backs for the rest of their lives. That is never going away. That is never going to change. It's who we are. It's what we have to take on. And I feel that even though you have to prepare your child for the real world, you also have to give your child the tools, the necessary tools to survive. Because just being hard is not enough.
Right.
Never showing vulnerability is not enough. You need to teach your child, yes, there are moments where you're gonna have to take on a more responsibility, or you're gonna have to do a certain thing. But the reality is, let your child be a child. Let your child know that you love them and that, yes, people out there might not give a fuck about them, but you give a fuck about them.
Right.
In the real world, nobody gives a fuck about your emotions, but I give a fuck about your emotions. In the real world, they're not gonna like it when you cry, but I don't mind if you cry. You are able to be vulnerable with me. You are able to be honest with me. You are able to be yourself with me, completely, unapologetically yourself. If you want to play with dolls, you can play with dolls, but also letting your child know that unfortunately, in the real world, not everybody's gonna understand that, but I don't give a fuck what nobody else thinks, because you're my child. You see what I'm saying?
I hear a word tonight.
I'm telling you, that's what we need. But we'll get to that Black trauma. So we're gonna get to that in a later episode this season. So this is my favorite segment of our episodes now. So many little boys and girls grow up never knowing the full scope of what their culture has contributed to their society and history. So it's time for that to change. Let's take a pause, rewind, and remind the world just how we did that. So in the article, Little Known Black History Facts, written by PBS, they discuss how most people, including myself, believed that Rosa Parks was the first person to give up their seat on the bus in Montgomery, Alabama. There was actually several women who came before her, one of whom was Claudette Colvin. Now, it was March 2nd, 1955, when the 15-year-old schoolgirl refused to move to the back of the bus, 9 months before Rosa Parks' stand that launched the Montgomery bus boycott. Now, Claudette had been studying Black leaders like Harriet Tubman in her segregated school. Those conversations had led to discussions around the current day Jim Crow laws they were all experiencing. So when the bus driver ordered Claudette to get up, she refused. It felt like Sojourner Truth was on one side pushing me down and Harriet Tubman was on the other side pushing me down. I couldn't get up is what she said. Now, Claudette Colvin's stand didn't stop there. Arrested and thrown in jail, she was one of 4 women who challenged the segregation in the law in the court. If Browder and V. Gale became the court case that successfully overturned the bus segregation laws in Montgomery, Alabama, why has Claudette's story been so largely forgotten? At the time, the reason why was because the NAACP and other Black organizations felt that Rosa Parks made a better icon for the movement than a teenager. Now, as an adult with the right look, Rosa Parks was also the secretary of NAACP. She was a well-known and respected with her people and associated with the middle class and could attract support for the cause. But the struggle to end segregation was often fought by young people, more than half of which were women. Now, I think that was such an intriguing fact because I had no idea that Rosa Parks was not the first woman to do that. I thought that she was just it. Like, I thought it was just her. So it was very enlightening to know that how much we are kind of, how much Black history is actually erased from us. That we didn't learn about Claudette Colvin because she didn't fit the image of the modern mom in the Black community, you know?
Right. And kind of on that note, did you know that one of the brains behind the March on Washington and a major influence of the civil rights movement was a gay man?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, so this comes from the National African American Museum of History and Culture. And we today will be discussing for We Did That, Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin was a key organizer in the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom and was one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s closest advisors, especially on techniques of nonviolent resistance. Rustin was extremely active in the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, and helped to lead the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, also known as SCLC. Early in his career, he was arrested for moral cause, which led to outing in public. However, once outed, Rustin was completely open about his sexuality and was never ashamed.
Mm.
Criticism and discrimination over his sexuality, however, led Rustin to have a more background role in the civil rights movement. He never wanted his sexuality to have a negative effect on the movement, which is often the reason that Rustin's efforts are not widely known. In fact, it was Representative Adam Clayton Powell Jr. of New York, angry that Rustin and King were planning a march outside of the Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles. Powell threatened to leak rumors to the press that Rustin and MLK were having an affair together if he didn't drop Rustin. That made King begin to distance himself from Rustin and made Rustin reluctantly resign from the SCLC. So, like with Claudette Colvin, I think that also kind of shows how so much of history is erased from us because, like, I had no idea who Barrett Rustin is until I became an African American studies major, until it was literally everything that I did was study Black people. And I think, like, just with our topic in general, we have to remember that we need to show care for our communities. We need to show care
Mm.
for everybody in our communities because just as we are marginalized, there are people within our own marginalized community that are further marginalized.
Absolutely. This is why we brought this segment to this show, to bring those marginalized voices to the spotlight, because there are so many voices that are so lost in the throes of history because they didn't fit a certain look or fit a certain image or sexuality. And I think that learning about Claudette Colvin, learning about Bayard Rustin, these are pinnacle historical figures that were lost to us in their histories were taken as a means of they were not important to the greater diaspora, to the society. So I think it's very important for us to remind the world that these people did exist and they did help further the movement for Black people and for people of color. So as always, guys, thank you so much for joining us this week. This is a very fun episode. As always, please keep the conversation going down in the comment box below. We do respond. If you are listening to us on any podcast platform, please do not forget to rate and review us. We really appreciate it if you do, because honey, Melanin Margin is cross-promoting, baby.
Right.
So,
Even if you're on YouTube, go to Spotify, go to Apple Music.
baby, it don't take nothing to listen to that thing. We can play it in the background, girl. You just listen to it again. Just listen to it again. Give us a like. So do not forget to follow us at Quaviondre Williams, or sorry, at Quaviondre, or at Andre Talks a Lot, and for Daquon at Daquon950, which will also be linked down below in the description box. So I think we have reached the end today, guys. Thank you so much, and we will see you all next week. Bye.